Well, look at that. Just get past election day, and now we got Stormy Nicole out here offering everybody in Florida blowjobs. Who the fuck would have thought, right? But it's time for week 9. I think we should get right into it because we got a storm a brewing in our fantasy league, especially when it comes down to getting to the playoffs. We are up to week 10 now, guys. Week 10, double digits. This is when it starts to feel real. And matchups are really getting more serious as we get into it. So let's get into it. I'm going to get into a couple of pretty good games. We didn't really have any, extremely good games where they were close and really went down to the wire, but we did have a couple that had a chance to that we were watching closely. And then after that, I'm going to get into our regular playoff seedings and power rankings and see where those differ. I'm going to get into our Week 10 matchups, which are very interesting. We got some amazing games that are coming up, very important for the playoffs. It could be a hinge pin for a lot of teams' seasons so far. And then lastly, and I'm not going to be talking about this too much until we get to the end, I want to get into the standings. I really want to see where all these divisional battles are at and how these things are playing out because it all matters. And you want to talk about some really close division battles? It is tight this year, folks, and we're going to get into it. So, starting off, game of the week 1, I think we might as well just go with Gus and Sahid. Sahid needed AK to get him a lot of points. Would have been reasonable. He's done it before, but he only got 9. He came up short, so it ended up really the difference here, though, if you look at it, wasn't so much at AK coming up short, but the defensive battle between them. Gus got 27 from New England, only 5 from KC. So for Sahid, so he gets his second loss of the year. Forgive me for saying that he's been pretty spoiled. So we'll have to see what happens when he plays Sammy Boy coming up, and we'll get into that soon. All right. Next up for the game of the week, I'd have to give the second one to Kyle and Jeff. Good to see Kyle get back on the winning column here, folks. Since week 1, he was having a long streak, trying to make every single move he could. I felt like every move he made was the wrong one. I feel you, man. I'm going through that in our other league, trust me. But 108.5 to 104 going into Monday night, but it ended up not being too close. Duvernay only got Jeff one more point. And Kyle got 10 from the Ravens D, and he won fairly easily. But even though it did come down to Monday night, it wasn't that close. It still was close enough where they were both watching. And you never know. If Duvernay could have gotten a huge play, then that could have swung. But obviously, it wasn't that type of game. And the Saints typically, bend but don't break too much on defense, even though they still lost. All right, getting into the rest of it. I finally got in the win column again, 152.5 to 117.5 over Joel. Really, the difference here was wide receivers. AJ and DA got 52. Drake London and D Hop only got Joel 16. And that's really the big difference there. Everything else was relatively even but back and forth. Manny, 145.5 over Hector, 109. Difference here was flex. 40 to 14. That was a pretty good difference there. Hawkinson, Connor, and T. Marsh over Julio Dorsett and Conklin is really the difference there. And then getting into Carlos, no longer Carlos, beats a really good opponent here in Alex, 155 to 128. It's pretty easy what the difference is here, folks. Mixon got him 64 fucking points. 64 points, 5 touchdowns, over 200 scrimmage yards, both rushing and receiving. 4 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving, I believe, was the tally. What a fucking game. That was crazy. Orange and black are back, but in a different way, because who would have thought the running back would be starring there, but he did. And then last but not least, I mentioned him already, and it'll be a huge test for Sahid, but Sam gets the $10 prize this week. 168 points, an easy win over Lewis. What was the difference here? Honestly, it's more about what Lewis couldn't do than what Sam really did. If you would have taken Sam's top 2 scores, just 2, he would have had 80 points and Lewis had 79, so he wins by 1. If you add the next score, and then all of Lewis's bench, they tie. Lewis had 27 in bench. The next highest score was Justin Jefferson for Sammy with 26, and that would offset and end in a tie. So that just goes to show this was not close. No one expected it to be. Lewis is trying his best to see if he can maybe pull an upset, ruin somebody's season later on. Obviously, he's not really in it, as far as the playoffs, but he wants to avoid that last place. Remember, that is a game. Just because he has the last or the worst record doesn't mean that he automatically gets the last place punishment. That is determined by the loser of that first round of the loser bracket game between the bottom two seeds. Keep that in mind. It's important. All right, so we went through the games. Let's go through the seedings. First up, Sahid. Second, Sam. They play this week. That's important. Next up, Joel is still at third seed. Alex in fourth. Fifth seed is Gus. Jeff is sixth. And last one in is Manny, which means the entire Super Bowl champion division would be in if the playoffs started today. First team out is Carlos. He's getting closer. Then me. Then Hector. Kyle, and of course, lastly, Lewis. Where are we at in power rankings? It's about the same. There's been some up and down a little bit, but it held pretty steady. Alex scoring just a shade under 152 a game. Sahid is in second, scoring 148.6 a game. Sam, 144.7. Carlos, 140.3. Then we get into Jeff at 138.4. Sixth, which is halfway through the list, we have Manny at 131.7. And then seventh, I finally come in at 128.4. Joel at 128 even. Kyle and Gus actually are tied, exactly tied for the amount of points scored so far this year. That could come into play if Kyle ends up getting on any sort of win streak and can try to sneak in. If Gus, they end up tied or whatever, depending on how the head-to-head, I forget what that ended up. I don't know if they already played. I think they did, and Gus probably won because of Kyle's losing streak recently. So he might own the head-to-head tiebreaker over him there. But then they're both tied at 125.4 a game. Hector, which is weird to see, second to last, 122.2 a game. Normally Hector is one of the higher scoring teams in our league. And then Lewis, 92.8. And falling, he has hit rock bottom, and he has grabbed a shovel. All right, let's look at Week 10. We have some very, very interesting games. And you know what? Let's actually go to the standings first, because we're going to need to know why these upcoming games are so interesting. So in the standings, in the Super Bowl Champions Division, Sam is the leader right now, 7-2. Gus is 1 game behind Sammy. 1 game behind. Now they split their head-to-head, and Sam has a commanding lead in points, which would be next up. So really Sam has a stranglehold there, but Gus is only 1 game behind. A couple games here, a couple games there. Sam doesn't win this game and Gus wins his. They are essentially tied, Sam with the lead, but all it takes is 1 more game either way. Very close. Manny isn't too far behind either. 5-4. That's 2 games off the leading pace, all right? In the NFL division, Alex is still the leader because we split our head-to-head. It goes to points. He has a comfortable lead there. So he essentially has a 1-game lead, really, because I probably will not catch him in points this year. But Alex is at 4-5. I'm at 4-5 as well, and I am at second. Kyle is at 2-7. That is only 2 games behind, folks. That's not that much. Kyle, I believe, me and him would have tiebreaker. I have points over him, but not by too much. I believe Alex has a comfortable lead over him, and he also swept Kyle, I believe. So that's where that's at. In the XFL division, Sahid at 7-2. Pretty comfortable lead. He's got a 3-game lead over Hector at 4-5. Lewis, of course, bringing up the rear at 1-8. Which his season is pretty much complete. However, he can still play some spoiler there, and yes, there's a pretty good cushion. It's the biggest cushion out of all our divisions for Sahid, but his goal is not just to win his division. He's trying for that first seed because he wants that bye, because otherwise he's not guaranteed to move on. And we've seen that before. If you lose that bye and you go into the playoffs, and you're taking a risk that you got a bad luck week and it's one and done. So keep that in mind. And last but not least, in the Pop Warner League, it is very close here. From top to bottom, this is the tightest that we have. We got Joel and Jeff tied at 5 and 4 right now. All right. I believe that is because Joel swept Jeff, and he owns that, so he pretty much has a one-game lead. If they tie, it goes to him, and that's where it's at. And then Carlos is 4 and 5. That's a one-game difference between the top and bottom. So that could completely flip after this week, because keep in mind that out of these teams, Joel, Jeff, and Carlos is the highest scoring team in his division. So I forget who swept or who won against who, except for Joel sweeping Jeff. But if Carlos wins and the other two lose, there's a chance, I believe, that Carlos could be number one in the division. All right. So let's go to week 10 with that knowledge. And I ordered these in order of importance, honestly. First up, Sam versus Heat. They're battling for the number one spot. This will be tiebreaker. So if they end up tied at the end of the year for the number one spot, this game is what will decide it. And that could very well happen. All right. This is for the 1 seed. Right now, Sahid is projected to win by 3. Next up, another big game. Alex versus Joel. Now, Joel has one guy missing out of his lineup right now, but Alex is favored by 7. It'll probably be almost even, so it's not only looking to be a great game, but these are also two division leaders who really cannot afford to lose ground. Why? These are the two divisions involved that have ties as far as record at the top of their divisions. And what's more is that I played Jeff. So it's 1 versus 1 as far as the NFL and Pop Warner League records right now. 1 versus 1 in the division and 2 versus 2. So this could completely flip around records, completely flip around seedings, depending on what happens. If Alex wins and I lose, he has a better cushion. If I win and Alex loses, I have a 1-game lead over him. Same with Joel and Jeff. They're tied with their records, and whatever happens in one game affects the other. And if you're losing, you're hoping that your division mate is losing too, and it's out of your hands at that point. So very, very big games at the top of the ticket this week. Next up, don't sleep. Oh, and by the way, I am favored by 23 over Jeff, but he is missing 2 players. All right. And Alex is favored by 7. Joel is missing 1. Moving on, don't sleep on Gus and Hector. This is a big game as well. Gus is 6 and 3, and if he's hoping that Sam slips and loses to Sahid, and he wants to step up and maybe take that division and even have a shot at the 1 seed, he needs to win this game against Hector. Now, Hector is the second lowest scoring team in the league. This should work out in his favor, but Gus is not that far ahead. He's only scoring about 3 points on average more. So this really is a toss-up, and that's exactly what the projections have it. Right now, Gus is missing 1, and so is Hector, but they're both favored, or Gus is favored by 8. All right. Next up, Kyle and Carlos. Don't sleep on this one either now, folks. Kyle is favored by 29. Carlos is missing 1. Which is surprising. And this is huge for Kyle because he still is in the race. Now, if me and Alex both lose, we'd be 4 and 6. If Kyle wins, he'd be 3 and 7 and 1 game out from a 3-way tie potentially in the division. All division games are done. So that would be huge as well. And then it might go to points because there's some different dynamics once you get a 3-way tie there. Alex would, of course, lead. But again, who knows what happens? If in a world where me and Alex both lose, who knows how badly he loses by or if he scores very many points. It's all up to luck. It really is. And vice versa. I mean, because just because you lose doesn't mean that you score a little points or a lot of points. It all matters. So even if you lose, if you score a lot of points, that still can help you down the road because it could be the difference in a 3-way tie. All right. Last but not least is Manny and Lewis. Everybody's starters are in for this game, and Manny's favored by 35. That's why it's last on the list. Barring a miracle or something surprising happening, Lewis is probably going to win this game, let's be honest. Manny is the 6th highest scoring team. He's in the top half. Lewis is last by a long shot, but stranger things have happened. Manny does need to win this game, so the pressure is more on him than it is on Lewis. He's expected to win, but he's 5-4, and if he's going to have any prayer to not only maybe take the division, but also make the playoffs, he is the last team in right now, so he's clinging on with me and Carlos hot on his heels because he's 5-4, we're 4-5. He needs to win in order to keep pace and prevent one of us from overtaking him. All right. So that's where we're at. A lot of good games this week. A lot of important games this week. It's only going to increase from here. It's still too far out for me to do any projections as far as what playoff spots are available. There's still 5 games. Yeah, 5 games left. So there's a lot of things that can happen. It's actually too hard to project until we get to 1, maybe 2 games out. But we are keeping an eye on these division races, guys, because, you know, Saeed has a comfortable lead, but it's 3 games, and that can change really quickly. If he goes on a skid, you know, if he starts getting some bad luck and other teams start scoring more against him, you just never know. So we'll have to see how it goes. Keep in mind we have 1 week left until the trade deadline. Make some moves or don't make some moves. There's risk either way, but just make sure you're making an informed decision, because otherwise waivers are going to be all you have to fill the rest of your team as you need to. All right, guys, stay safe. I know we got that storm out there. Hopefully it's not too bad. Hope you all stay safe and your families do too. Peace, punch, Captain Crunch, bitches.